You are listening to the Draft Show on the All Hornets podcast network, and the Charlotte Hornets have shocked the NBA world, the Hornets fan base, me and Chase, by drafting Tidjane Salaun from Cholet Basket in France, the 18-year-old who was mostly projected to the Spurs or later to OKC, ended up being selected 6th in the draft. And I mean, nobody saw that coming apart from Kristen Peak, who was on this podcast, the last episode. She tweeted out just hours before the draft that he was in contention for 6. Very interesting and very good scoop by Kristen Peak there. Wow, Chase, we've had a little bit of time to kind of process this. It's towards the end of the first round as we're recording. What are your immediate thoughts of the drafting of Salaun?
I mean, first of all, shout out to Kristen Peak because she nailed this legitimately like hours before the draft. Me and James were talking about this off air. That was the first time that there was really any sort of Hornets Salaun connection that was like legitimate. Was the day of the draft from one reporter in specific. So shout out to Kristen Peak, Yahoo Sports. Has been doing great work over there this cycle, and now Hornets fans know we can obviously. We can believe when Kristen Peak has a scoop with the Charlotte Hornets when it comes to the draft. That much is for sure. So, I mean, my initial reaction, I was very surprised. Like, obviously, a huge upside swing. I think that's probably the main takeaway with picking Tidjane Salaun, number 6, 18 years old, one of the youngest players in the draft. Super raw skill set. Has had a lot of like interesting flashes this year with Cholet in the French league, but didn't play a ton. The numbers don't pop off the screen. So it's definitely like the classic, like high upside, pretty high risk as well, probably when you're taking him this high. But if it pays off, I mean, that's always a swing that teams are going to be willing to take if they can convince themselves they believe in that player. And by all means, it seems like the Hornets believe in Tidjane Salaun.
I mean, let's be honest. Me and you are pretty stunned, right? We've done, I think, over 25 hours of draft coverage. And we've mentioned Salaun's name a handful of times and didn't even do a deep scout or include him in our pros and cons episode either. Like, because he didn't work out for Charlotte, or that's what we were told. He didn't work out for Charlotte because of an ankle injury. But the Hornets have posted a photo of him clearly in a Charlotte Hornets workout vest. So he did work out at some point. So there was some smoke screen going on somewhere there. I think... Look, no one saw this coming. I think we thought Dalton Knecht was the guy. I mean, I think he was 6th in odds, Salaun, like just hours before the draft to be the Hornets pick at 6. I think this means a couple of things. One, the Hornets are not rushing to get back to kind of competing for next season. If they wanted to be back pushing for the playoffs or playing, there is guys like Dalton Knecht sitting right there who you could have taken. Ended up going for a bit of a slide in the end, Dalton Knecht. But you're right. They have taken a guy who is kind of a long-term project. For those who don't know, and I think a lot of people listening to this will be like looking at Salaun really for the first time now because it's just not a name that was connected really at any point. I think CBS Sports had a mock with Salaun to Charlotte about a month ago, and they were like the only ones that I can recall. But I mean, look, for me, he was 12th on my board. Where was he on your board, Chase?
He was number 21 for me, so I'm definitely a bit lower on him, even than consensus. But I mean, obviously, especially than those in the Charlotte Hornets front office.
Yeah, I mean, he was in the same tier for me as like the prospects from like 5 to 15. I had him 1 tier, so like this, by all means, like in the tier of prospects that I would consider from. So like for me, I think I gave this a grade of like a B- as a pick. I will say, Chase, if I was to ask you to say. This draft often gets compared to 2013, right? Because of the weak draft. And that was also the draft that Giannis Antetokounmpo came out of. If I was to ask you which player is closest to Giannis Antetokounmpo pre-draft in this year's draft, would Tidjane Salaun have been your answer? Super young, kind of late bloomer, excellent athleticism, length. Like, doesn't have the feel that Giannis had, right? I'm not saying it's a perfect comp, but in terms of like that upside swing of just like this kid has something, he needs to figure a lot more of the game out. He needs to process it better, but there's obviously some real strengths there that flash, strongly. I think he is the guy. You know, I'm not saying he's going to be Giannis Antetokounmpo, but that's the type of upside swing I think we've seen this front office take in their first draft.
Absolutely. And I mean, I don't know if I would personally fall into this line of belief, but there is something to be said for like you have the number 6 pick, and now like if we can infer that taking a high upside swing with the number 6 pick, you're probably at least somewhat prepared to not make the playoffs next year, or at least aren't making, you know, a playoff or play-in berth as like a mandatory, like a necessity for success for your season. So that kind of gives you like a little bit more leeway to make a bigger upside swing with this number 6 pick, because you're probably not, you can't rely on having these picks that are that high, right? Like you can get to number 3 like we saw this year and then drop down 3 spots, or could have gone even further, and then you're out of the range of the prospects that you maybe thought that you were going to be looking at going into the lottery or even going into the season beforehand. Like you can't look at 2025 and be like, well, the Hornets are going to, you know, be able to pick Cooper Flagg next year. Like you got to take your upside swing now if you can get it. And the Hornets seem to be doing that right now, because like you said, they could have picked Connect, Devin Carter, Klingon even, and probably have taken like a pretty lucrative trade back offer if they had wanted to trade Donovan Klingon in Portland, or Memphis.
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about that, because Jake Fisher reported while the Hornets were on the clock that they were he reported they were going to trade back to Memphis at 9. Then he reported that they were in discussions to trade back with Memphis at 9. And then he reported that they are staying at 6 and taking Salaun. So you imagine Memphis were looking to trade up to try and take Klingon, who was on the board. And I think we talked about actually that exact trade back scenario in our trades episode. If we got one thing right, it was we almost nailed the Memphis trade. I think both of us would have probably preferred to take that route. I'm guessing the reason that didn't happen is they had Salaun top of their draft board, and they were worried the Spurs were going to take him at 8. And if you go back to 9, then you end up you miss out on the guy who you want. And the Spurs ended up basically trading out of 8 to give to Rob Dillingham to Minnesota, right? So I think that was definitely an area of concern. But I would have been like, personally, I would have had Salaun top of my board. I would have taken that offer, even if it was, you know, like we talked about Aldama in a 2nd round pick or something of that nature, or even if it's just future draft capital. I would have taken it. I would have happily taken guys like Buzelis, Devin Carter, even Dalton Connect. Like even you had Dalton Connect higher on your board than Salaun. All of a sudden, this is flipped. You're now being like, the Hornets should have drafted Dalton Connect. You bet you didn't think you'd be saying that in draft night.
No, and you know what else was so funny, and just on a Dalton Connect thing really quick, because I'm obviously known for having him low. When the Lakers picked him, I think that might be one of the best picks of the entire first round. They got him exactly where I had him on my big board, and is like a perfect fit team-wise. So see, that's what happens. Is like I don't necessarily think that he isn't a good draft pick. It's just got to be at the right spot. But unfortunately, the Hornets picked another guy that I also thought would not have been, and that's my favorite draft pick in that spot. But obviously, like, with the upside, this is much easier can like sell for myself, because I also had him in the tier of players from 9 to 21. He was number 21, but I mean, I had him and Zachary Sachet in the same tier, and he went number 1. So, I mean, there are ways to talk yourself into this. I feel like, even if you're somebody that's lower on him like me.
So I'm just going to give a brief scout for people who maybe haven't seen Salaun play. You've probably already read a little bit about it. We've got a bunch of content on allhornets.com. You know, we graded the pick. We talked about how he will fit in the team, why the Hornets drafted him, how the selection will impact free agency. There's a ton of stuff on allhornets.com, so make sure you check that out. But one of the things I was asked to, like, what are some kind of comps of Tidjane Salaun? And like for me, the first one that I tried to come to mind, which is reasonable, was like for a base level, a floor level, was like an Aaron Naismith. Like really tough defender, plays with super energy, has decent size, can shoot the ball from deep, but not a particularly great process with the ball, struggles to kind of put the ball on the floor. But like Aaron Naismith is like, I think 6'6" or 6'5". Tidjane Salaun is legitimately 6'10" in shoes. So when you take, if you make Naismith like 4 or 5 inches bigger, that is changing the trajectory of him as a player. And like some of the upside is like Jabari Smith, like long term, like someone who can shoot, defend multiple positions. Again, not someone who'll put the ball on the floor much. So those are some of the comps that I'll provide. I mean, the first thing I will say is this guy will jump off your screen with the energy that he plays with on the defensive end. Like, he just brings it. And that can be infectious when you have someone who plays like that. Like, multiple efforts in every play, never quits, light on his feet, challenges everything, like guards opposing teams and some best players at times. Sometimes he needs to like channel that in constructive ways, but that comes with being young. I mean, I don't think we've mentioned yet. He is, I think, the youngest, if not one of, in this draft class. So definitely will be a guy who you compare it to like Bezelis. I think Bezelis is like 19 and a half or 20. He's like a full year younger than Bezelis. So you have to think about, well, where would Salaun have been in the draft if he'd, I don't know, stayed overseas, played another year, cemented his starting spot? He could have been, you know, in this range or maybe even higher for next year. So definitely one I think Hornets fans will have to be patient on, just because, like, you can even tell, right, the language barrier is going to be a factor. He's not one of these French prospects who kind of already speaks fluent English like Alex Sarr, who spent years over in America and Australia. I think he's probably got a larger learning curve than most guys selected in the lottery. But I think the background on his work ethic and his approach, I think, is just really positive from what I understand. It's probably just the processing speed of the game, which will be a question. And then, like, he can shoot the three off the spot up, shot that pretty well this year. Anything off the bounce or off the dribble, if it's not a dunk, that's where the concerns come, right? Like, he's not a playmaker. He's someone who struggles to put the ball on the ground, and he struggles to really finish around the rim on layups. I think he shot like 51% on layups this year, which is terrible for someone of his size. And then the other thing, for a guy who has like a 9.2 standing reach, which is comparable with some centers, he blocks 0.2 shots per game, which just makes no sense considering how good of an athlete he is and how long he is and how hard he plays. Like, I always wonder if like there was team context there. I don't even know. That it's just one of the most surprising like block rates of any prospect in the draft. So I'm curious to kind of dig more into that once we get past draft night. But I guess, is there anything that I've said there that you disagree with in terms of that scout of his strengths and weaknesses?
No, I was actually going to emphasize that thing that you said at the end about just the lack of block generation for somebody that's like as big and has the athletic tools that he has. Because I guess I don't know if I would say he's like a great athlete or really like above average. He's like a little bit stiff, I think, is my biggest hang up with him. But he is very strong built. He's 6'10", like 220 pounds. He moves pretty well for his size, all things considered. Obviously has pretty like quick, active hands and passing lanes because he does get a lot of steals. But he had 66 stocks this past season, 57 of which were steals. He only had 9 blocks in the amount of like games and minutes that he played, even in like a high level like French league. And this was his first year in the French LNB like Pro A Division 1. I believe he played on Cholette's under 21 team for like 2 seasons before that. But he played 33 games this past year and only collected 9 total blocks for somebody that is by all means like a better like physical specimen or more of a physical specimen and like physically advantaged player than most of the guys in that league. So, and at his age too, like obviously he's not going to have the same experience level and like feel for the game, which is probably his like biggest shortcoming right now, I guess, is his ability to process the game quickly and put himself in the right spots. But he obviously has a ton of energy, and that makes up for that lack of instincts that you may have, which obviously you'd rather have somebody just be able to like be a smart player that processes the game quickly. But at the age of 18 in a high level pro league with that type of physical tools, all you have to do is be able to like push him up to some degree because he's always going to have his motor on 100. So this is going to give you like a certain floor at least if you have that.
And remember, Charlotte are in a position where it's not like Washington, where it's like we need to draft guys who can like create for us, create for themselves, create for others. They have LaMelo Ball, they have Brandon Miller, they have high-level shot makers, guys who are going to have the ball a lot. If you're drafting to complement that group, you maybe want guys who can stretch the floor and play simple, can cut and do the little things. And I actually do think Salaun kind of fits with that, right? He's someone who's going to basically take open shots, get out in transition, cut and attack the rim. And I think it's actually a good landing spot for him because he's not going to be asked to suddenly do more with the ball in the hands, like if he'd gone to Washington or if he'd gone to San Antonio, who still don't really have a point guard yet. Like he's got a situation that I think actually suits him. And we talk about how the Hornets don't have like a perimeter ball stopping defender. And maybe you like think Cody Martin is that guy. And if he can stay healthy, he could be, right? He could still realistically be the starting shooting guard going into next year. But they also don't really have a great guy to stick on Jason Tatum, Luka Doncic, like these bigger, like massive jumbo wing creators. And I think Salaun has the physical tools and athleticism and energy to potentially be a guy who long-term, like there'll be a steep learning curve, right? Because these are elite offensive players. But long-term, I think he has the attitude and approach to potentially be one of those guys that you can throw on those type of jumbo creators. And that is something that the Hornets team don't currently have, in my opinion. Like it's maybe what JT Thor was supposed to be, but like we've seen 3 years now, and it's just not really translated with JT Thor, and it's not come across. So I do think I like the fit for Salaun. I think where Hornets fans will be frustrated is how patient do they have to be.
And the only thing that I think might not work in Tidjane's favor, at least from the perspective of Hornets fans, is we kind of saw a player that had a similar billing in the draft a couple of years ago, right? Like this is a very similar like post-draft analysis or post-pick analysis, I think, of when Kai Jones was selected a couple of years ago. Like athletic, tall, like raw skill set, but has all the physical tools to be able to grow into the type of player that like every team in modern basketball is like coveting. Just a guy that's 6'10", 6'11", but can move out on the perimeter like he's a guard. Like ideally, like that's a similar view of what Salaun is going to be in the long run. Like maybe more of just like a jumbo wing, I guess, than like Kai Jones being like a high flying athletic center. But like it's the same type of deal where the guy just has a very raw skill set that you're hoping to be able to build upon over the next couple of years, that by the time he's 20, 21, like he's fully rotation ready and has like some marquee skills to bank on to be able to be like a real like two-way impact player.
I think that's actually a fair like comparison to bring up in some ways. The one difference I would say is I think Salaun projects as a much, much better shooter. Like Kai Jones kind of shot the ball in college, and it was like a really low volume rate, and it was always kind of theoretical, and it wasn't great mechanics. Salaun like shows a lot more versatility in his shot. Like some of his makes this year are like kind of like, oh, 6'10" guy doing that. Like he has really good footwork, smooth mechanics. So, and like if Kai Jones could have shot the ball from deep at like a good level, then that gave him a better path. I think the other thing is Kai Jones was a sophomore when drafted. I think he was an older sophomore at that. I want to say that Salaun is a couple of years younger than Kai Jones. And I would say already probably has like a better basketball IQ. Like Kai Jones was someone who kind of got by on his athleticism and just like, he had some ball skills for the size at the time in college. But even in college, remember, I believe he came off the bench, Kai Jones. Like he was not someone they wanted in the starting lineup because like you had to manage him in delicate situations. Salaun just started on a professional team in France and had like some of the best games of his career in the playoffs against the eventual champions in France, which was Paris, and was probably like the team's best player in those games. And I don't think Kai Jones ever had kind of production like that at his age. But I do understand, like, I'm not saying here there's not an element of risk. Like, that's why I had him lower down. And I also think Ron Holland is maybe another guy who you could argue is like a comp in terms of like great defender, good athlete, good measurables. The reason I had Salaun over Ron Holland, and I made that change quite late in the process, is because Salaun is just so much bigger. He's like another 4 inches taller and has another 3 inches on his wingspan. And like that just matters for me. And I think his shot profiles to be better. Even though I think Holland, I know you're a Holland fan, and he went 5. So I know you're very happy about that. But I think Holland has probably had a little bit more wiggle on the ball than Salaun. But again, I like guys who can play to their strengths. And I think that is something that Salaun does probably more than Ron Holland.
Yeah, at least at this stage too, in a smaller role, which you can imagine, like regardless of whether of who they picked at this spot, like apart from being like Connect or Carter or more of a win now player, that this guy's going to have a pretty small role. Like the Hornets are a rebuilding team. The last 2 years have not gone well. They're definitely trying to reset the direction of this franchise, but like, you know, they're still have enough players on this roster that are like more than NBA rotation player quality, like LaMelo, Brandon Miller, Mark Williams, bona fide starters. Grant Williams, starter on many teams in the league. Cody Martin, starter on many teams in the league. Like there is talent on this roster. So there's going to need to be like some level of like, there's going to need to be a bar that Salaun or any of these other players that they had picked would have had to clear. So I feel like that's a good thing to be able to get them in there and not have them just be thrown to the wolves right away. Because, I mean, you see Cholet didn't do that. Like Salaun wasn't playing massive minutes in the LNB Pro A in his first year as an 18-year-old. Like I can't imagine that it would be a great idea to throw him out there and play him 29 minutes a night or something for the Hornets as a rookie. So it's definitely good that he's going to be able to be like eased in some way because there are other players at his position on the roster already.
A couple of things I want to touch on. In terms of Summer League, looking forward to his rookie year, how do you expect that to go?
So he's not like he will not turn 18 until like a couple weeks after Summer League ends. So I don't necessarily anticipate him being an extremely effective or like somebody that pops off the screen at Summer League. As long as he can go there and show the same flashes that he showed in the French League and at least be that same high motor, like high energy player in a much different environment than what he's ever played in before, I feel like that's going to be really the main positive takeaway that I can have, because there are very few like 18-year-olds that just go in and absolutely dominate Summer League. You got to be Cam Whitmore, Summer League MVP, to be that type of thing. So I can't see him being like the best player on the Hornets Summer League team or something like that, or somebody that puts up like eye-popping numbers. But as long as we get those high motor flashes and all that other stuff translates, I think we'll be on the right track there. What do you expect from him in his Summer League debut here, which is really not that far from now either. It's only in like 2 or 3 weeks.
No. Look, the Hornets Summer League team always seems to be a bit of a train wreck. I expect it to be a struggle just because of his youth and experience adjusting to, like, there's some players who've like been over to the US playing in things like the Nike Hoop Summit. You know, Alex Sarr was over playing overtime, or you played in like the French junior national teams and you've like played the US loads of times and you kind of got an idea of what it's like culturally more than anything. Salaun's a really late bloomer. Like he didn't even make, I think, the under-16 squad in France, and kind of really came on late, and isn't a guy who I think has been exposed to American basketball culture a lot. So I think he's probably got a steeper learning curve than most. He needs someone to deliver the ball for him, and we know in Summer League that's not always the way it always goes. It's normally quite chaotic. But so I think it might be a little bit of a struggle early on, but that's kind of to be expected. For the season, I kind of expect him to log some time in the G League. Maybe less so if Miles Bridges leaves and they don't sign a replacement power forward. Then you might have him second or third on the depth chart behind Grant Williams. But you have to remember, people gave the 6th pick in the G League. This would normally be the kind of indicative value of like a late lottery pick. And last year we saw a host of late lottery picks, Grady Dick, etc., like all spending time playing in the G League. And so it's something that I would just kind of expect, and I don't think it's a bad thing at all. So I don't have great expectations for this season for Salaun. If he does force his way into the rotation in Charlotte during his rookie year, at any point, I think you can class that as a success.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you brought up the G League too, because I was actually going to touch on that myself. I mean, Amen Thompson went number 4 last year in a much better draft. He played in the G League. Jarris Walker was the 8th pick. He played a lot in the G League. Taylor Hendricks was number 9. He also played a lot in the G League last year. Like, it is not, you know, uncommon for players drafted in the top 10 to play a pretty significant number of G League minutes. And I think as the years go on and as the salary cap like tightens and forces teams to kind of build around like very specific like salary slots and percentages of your salary cap that players are taking up, like if you can get a high draft pick and like you just have someone in front of them but maybe somebody that's not on the books for as long, you play them in the G League for 1 year, like what the Pacers did with Jarris Walker, basically. Now guys like Jalen Smith, Obi Toppin, whoever else depart, you slide them right in and they have a year of like NBA level experience essentially under their belt instead of just sitting on the bench and having watched after being picked in the top 10, which could probably ruin your confidence a little bit, on top of the fact that you're not getting any playing experience. So regardless of what happens with Salaun, he will be playing in some way because he's not somebody that would benefit, I think, from sitting on the bench and like learning in that regard. So he's going to be in the G League, or he'll be good enough to crack the rotation as like a bench 4 and just like a high energy, like rebounding defense, like glass cleaning forward or something like that. So there's very few ways in which he's kind of just buried on the bench this year, I feel like.
Some quotes from Jeff Peterson, hot off the press. I think he's only scratching the surface. He's a maniacal worker. He doesn't want to do anything other than play basketball. He's very excited to get here to Charlotte. He's low maintenance and he just loves the gym, which, you know, some classic GM speak there on any draft pick, but positive things to hear nonetheless. Another quote, I'm encouraged by shooting. I have confidence he'll be able to stretch the floor. There's plenty of possessions where he grabs a rebound and pushes the pace. He's not a finished product by any means, but there's a lot of flashes. And then finally, maybe most interesting, Jeff Peterson said, Cliff was definitely high on Salaun. Says he asked him to watch a few players and he knocked them out in a few days. So that's Steve Clifford getting involved in drafting, which is very, very interesting here. What is it you think that Cliff saw in Salaun that made it jump out?
The first thing that pops off to me is the motor. Obviously, you know, Cliff is going to love a guy that's just going out, giving absolute like full bore effort on both ends of the floor every single time they're out there, especially for a guy that's that young and in that setting. Like he had like plenty of reason to go out there and be like maybe a little bit nervous or uptight, just not like sure of himself or confident. But you can tell when Salaun plays that he is making his decisions with confidence. Whether or not it's like the right decision all the time, that can be ironed out in time and with more experience, especially at the NBA level with NBA coaching staffs. But you just need a guy that's going to be able to like willing to take those risks and at least has the motor and the energy and just the overall, like at least a foundation of a feel for the game to be able to make plays like that. And Salaun at least does it often enough, I think, to where you could definitely see somebody that has the basketball philosophies that Cliff has presented in all of his like post-game media availabilities and interviews and whatnot, buying into that.
Yeah, I think another one is size for the position. That's something that Cliff talked about all the time. Is like size for the position is something you value. You looked at how the NBA got a lot bigger in this postseason. And again, Salaun is something that matches that. I mean, the Hornets' current power forwards, Grant Williams and Miles Bridges, are like 6'5", both of them, right? They're wide in stature and strength, but they are vertically challenged for a lot of power forwards. And Salaun brings a different dynamic there, which is interesting. The last thing I want to touch on here, Chase, how do you think, we talked about Miles Bridges, how do we think this affects free agency? Because I'm telling you, Miles Bridges and Rich Paul are sitting there tonight watching the draft, and they're all seeing the Hornets pass on guys like Dalton Connect, Devin Carter, and they're all seeing them draft a power forward, plays the exact same position as Miles Bridges. Do you expect this to have an impact on Bridges coming back? Do you think this is a sign of things to come?
I absolutely do. I feel like you can only have so many players at the depth chart that kind of slot into that archetype. It doesn't seem like Grant Williams, somebody that's like on the trade block per se. And obviously he's signed to a long-term contract. This past season was his first year of a 4-year deal. Like you're not relying on him leaving in free agency anytime to create any space. You'd have to move him. Cody Martin is the same way. I think he has another year after this upcoming one that he's going to have on his deal. Both of your centers are locked in. Like somebody has to be on the outs here eventually, other than JT Thor would be. But I don't think that, you know, the idea is to replace your bench forward with your number 6 overall pick. You're probably aiming a little bit higher than that, and at least having to slot this guy into the starting lineup at some point. So I definitely think it does have an impact on it. Maybe not in the like in the sense of like they're not going to sign any player to that position, but I could definitely, or I would be surprised if they invest $30 million into it. I will say that. I could see them still getting another like wing forward, like 6'8", 6'9" guy that just kind of plays defense because they need more of those. But I would be surprised if they make like a heavy investment in it.
I agree. It makes it less likely Miles returns. I still think I would lean towards that he does slightly. Look, there is always the possibility as well that the Hornets view Miles as a 3 long term, right? And you slide Brandon Miller to the 2, Miles to the 3. Like he's never guarded that position on the defensive end that well, Bridges. But like offensively, I think he does have a skill set in terms of being able to handle the ball, stretch the floor, attack the rim. I can see why that works, and if that's the sell, then maybe there is more of a path, right? But I do agree with you. I think it makes it less likely. I think he will be looking at that going, all right, Charlotte, I can see how you feel about me. You've drafted basically a replacement if everything goes to plan, and that's what you're hoping he turns into. So I think it makes it less likely. But that's pretty much everything here, Chase. Look, we were kind of all resigned to like Dalton Connect. He felt like a pretty safe, boring, dull pick. Like even though he's 10th on my board, a bit higher than Salaun, I wasn't excited by the idea of Dalton Connect. Salaun is a mystery box, and I do think like this is a more exciting pick. By exciting, it could also be clearly like a riskier pick, and it could end up to work out a lot worse than maybe someone with a higher floor. But we now get to watch this guy who, like, we don't fully know what he could be. We don't know quite what his ceiling is. I think Jeff Peterson even said in his press conference he doesn't want to put a ceiling on anything and that he has some traits that translate to the NBA extremely well. So a really interesting home run swing. Look, I'm expecting this is going to get panned, by the way, by national media. I'm telling you right now. Yes. There's going to be bad grades throughout. Even by other Hornets podcast media. I did a media poll with Hornets, like kind of draft media. And out of the 11 prospects, I had people rank 1 to 11. Salaun ranked last out of those 11 prospects. So there's probably going to be a lot of criticism coming his way. I feel bad for the guy because like he's not done anything to deserve that. Even though he was slightly lower on my board, a lot lower on your board, I think we've been pretty fair in how we talk about it. And like both of us can see the vision, even if it's not what we necessarily would have done. We can see the vision there. And I think that makes sense, and we fairly evaluated him. So it was good to catch up with you, Chase, get your thoughts on Salaun. And we will now have to wait to see what happens in the second round and start to look forward to free agency, which starts in literally about 72 to whatever it is hours, like, which is crazy.
Quick turnaround here. It's another first round in the books. I think this is 5 drafts in a row that we've done this now, James. So getting in the swing of things. 5 in
a row?
I think so. I'm pretty sure we started in 2020. So 2020, 21, 22, 23,
that's
24.
Crazy, man.
There we go. I mean, it honestly is pretty crazy now that I just thought of that as you were doing your outro. That is pretty wild to say it like that. But Tidjane Salaun capping off the 5-year anniversary of Chase and James Hornets podcasting. So congratulations to Tidjane. On top of fulfilling your lifelong dream, you have also become a monumental moment in podcasting history.
Absolutely. And look, the sun is coming up. The sun is coming up where I am. It is 4:40 a.m. The irony of this podcast is we had to start early because Chase said he wanted to get an early night because he had work tomorrow, which was just like hilarious. But you get your beauty sleep, Chase. Yeah, you enjoy your sleep. I'll be working here for the All Hornets website probably until about 6-ish. So I need to edit this and I need to get this up straight away. So, but yeah, it's good chatting with you. It was a lot of fun. And for our next episode, we actually did record our kind of like live reactions to the pick. I've not had a chance to edit it for this, but we might try and slip it in kind of an episode in a future week or so you can hear our surprise reaction. But thanks, everyone. Hope you enjoyed watching the draft. Thanks for sticking with us, and we will speak to you next time.
See you guys.